Star Wars 7x7, episode 1950. Today, an excerpt from my interview on the Holochronicles podcast. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode where I'm going to share an excerpt from an interview that I did with Andy and Josh from the Holochronicles podcast. This is actually them having me on their show, and so I'm the one being interviewed this time around. And it turns out that they reached out and we scheduled this a while back, and the date that we arranged for the recording to happen was October 21st, and we did that well before we knew that the Rise of Skywalker trailer was going to drop on the 21st, but we kept the date, and we got so into the conversation that we didn't actually stop to watch the trailer. We actually just plowed through the whole interview, and then it wasn't until we wrapped the interview that we then watched the trailer together and talked about it and stuff. But the part of the interview that I'm going to share with you includes some of the digressions, the non-toy related things that we talked about. One of them has to do with the the blocking done by Pablo Hidalgo of a ton of people on Twitter. And then we get into the notion of, whether I, would identify more with Cal Ripken or with Johnny Carson in terms of my longevity on, doing this podcast. And, it's funny, I don't know why I didn't mention Vin Scully in my response during the show. It's just, funny how things, happen when you're in the middle of a show and it just doesn't occur to you. But I guess my answer, would have been, if I'd thought of it, that he would probably be the one I identify with most. But, there's also the fact that I don't necessarily see myself in that same kind of Iron Man way. And I will explain that in that particular clip. And then we'll get into a thing about where I get my news from, the research that I do for the show, and a couple of unique places I've gotten it from over the years, and just how I came to figure those sorts of things out. And Andy and Josh were so incredibly nice in the collecting side of things. I mentioned that I particularly like snow-related things, and that I had a snow speeder. It's, no longer part of my collection, and they were kind enough to actually send me one as a thank you gift. And if you're watching the video version of the show, you may be able to see that Josh actually was able to laser engrave a Star Wars 7x7 logo on the battery cover of the snowspeeder, which is pretty astounding. So thank you guys so much for that and for having me on the show. I had a great time. And as I said, this is just an excerpt, but if you go to sw7x7.com/holo, H-O-L-O, that will link you to the full conversation. And I hope you check out the podcast in general, because it's good fun. They don't just talk about collectible stuff. If, collectible stuff isn't necessarily your bag, they talk about a lot of other stuff too. So there you go. But yeah, that's the scoop. So I'm going to take a quick break, and then we'll get into that excerpt from the show. But for now, it just remains for me to say thank you again so much for joining me and Andy and Josh for this episode. May the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be. And now stay tuned right after the break. Part of that conversation with Andy and Josh from the Holochronicles podcast. Hey Rebel Rouser, I've made some changes to the asteroid belt level at patreon.com/SW7x7, and they are all with sponsors in mind. So if you want to get the word out about your business, your product, your service to a dedicated Star Wars audience, then please check out patreon.com/SW7x7 and look for the asteroid belt level for details. Again, that's patreon.com/SW7x7.
So, Alan, the real question I got out of that is, have you been blocked by Pablo?
Yes, I have been blocked by Pablo.
Then he's just blocking everyone. Come on.
That's his loss.
My personal Twitter account and the Star Wars 7x7 show account have both been blocked by Pablo. So, yes, I've been double blocked, in fact.
Oh, boy.
So maybe it's a cool thing to be.
Yeah, I guess maybe.
Yeah,
maybe we're not.
If Pablo still has you on his list, you might be kind of an outcast at this point.
Definitely.
Yeah, I did feel sad. Did he block you guys too?
He blocked us like 6 months ago for no reason at all. Well, we'd never interacted with him.
I don't know, blockchains. I don't know exactly how and why, but my understanding is that if you don't want to follow anybody that follows a particular person, that you can put them on a blockchain, and then that just eliminates, in fear of, I don't know if it's fear, but just not having to deal with people of a certain opinion or whatever, I mean, I don't know. That's my understanding of it, and I'm not going to say that it's an expert opinion, but that's what I understand anyway.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I'm
maybe there's
hurt. I shouldn't be. I've met him like once or twice and exchanged like maybe half a dozen words. So had maybe 2 or 3 Twitter exchanges here and there. But like, yeah, there's no reason for him to not block me. Especially since he's blocking far and wide. But yeah,
Sure.
I do feel a little hurt. Like, in all honesty, I do.
Yeah. As of this recording, Alan, you have successfully gone 1,935 podcasts in a row, and which is, to me, Josh and I were talking about this. I said you're like the Cal Ripken of Star Wars podcasts. And Josh, what did you say?
I went Johnny Carson. I mean, for me, just like of Star Wars podcasts, because it was when we started getting into creating our own pod, and obviously we just wanted to sit down and talk Star Wars, and said, hey, why not? Let's record it. And you can tell that that's kind of the case around the community right now. Lots of new Star Wars pods popping up as the equipment gets less expensive and the quality gets better, and hosting isn't a big deal, etc. And so I was just like, look, when I first went and started researching other Star Wars pods to kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, look at the competition.
Or research.
Yeah, research, right? We're just looking, checking out how the other guys do it, what their format is, what they sound like. I found you. And of course, hit Andy up, and I was like, hey, have you listened to 7x7? I said, it could be my favorite format ever. We had already recorded like 3 or 4 of our own pods, so we'd already established like what we were going to do. Right. But I was like, it's 7 minutes. He gets right to the dang point. We get a little tidbit, and then before I know it, I'm 5 in, and a half hour of my time. No big deal. It was or 35 minutes, whatever. But
let's do the math.
Let's do the math.
I get it.
Yeah. So it was, that's what I said is like, look, whenever I wanted, and heck, by the way, half of your pods, not to blow too much smoke here, but half of your pods, gave me ideas for things that we could talk about on here. And so, like Andy said, I'm very, very, impressed by what you do, your format, and man, the research that you put in is pretty cool. So I have a few questions on that.
Do you see yourself more as Johnny Carson or Cal Ripken? What's the better analogy?
Gosh, and the strange thing is that I have a Johnny Carson comedy album. It's him being interviewed by somebody for the Laugh.com website about the nature of comedy and how he approaches it. And it's actually stuck on my younger son's phone, and it came up in the car randomly tonight. And I said to him, I know this seems, old and slow and, probably not your thing, but you like to be funny. You might want to check out something like this, because Johnny Carson was a really big deal back in his day. And it's now very strange for you guys to be mentioning Johnny Carson. Yeah.
We said it 3 days ago. That's when we talked. And the reason, my point, now Johnny Carson, obviously hilarious.
Yes.
My point was just kind of, I guess, the clout. For me, it's like, hey, do you got 2,000 podcasts under your belt about Star Wars? This is the guy that's been around doing it when everyone was, wondering what a podcast was. That's all, the original. So there you go, Alan. That's how I feel about you.
That's very kind of you.
I think you're funny too, by the way. So.
Thank you for that too. Yeah, I don't think about it either those terms. And in fact, I look back and say the Forcecast, for example, which has gone through multiple iterations of hosts, but has been around for more than a decade. And that to me seems like the high bar of longevity. It is a special kind of insanity to be doing a daily show and to be nearing 2,000 episodes. But yeah, I guess I've never really thought of myself in that particular fashion. It's always been there's a Woody Allen movie, Zelig, where, like, among other personalities he takes on, somehow he ends up flying a plane backwards and upside down across the Atlantic Ocean in the 1930s. And he says something like, well, it just goes to show you what you can do when you're insane, or something like that. And that's kind of how I felt about doing this. Like, it's a very particular and niche kind of insanity, but I love it. And this is the honest truth. I have never had a night where I've sat down and thought to myself, ugh, I don't want to do the show. Like, do I really have to do this? And I know I've set myself up for the commitment of it by saying it's a daily, but I've never had the situation. I've had the, oh my gosh, what am I going to talk about? What's it going to be about? And, those kind of frantic moments from time to time, but never, I don't want to do this, which is just amazing.
That's pretty awesome, man. And we're glad that you do, because we've gotten a lot out of entertainment out of listening to you.
And you're always, hold on, I'll stay on that real quick. And you always do have a topic, though. I like to view your pod as, what I like about it is your insight into the workings behind the, in the industry. That's what I like. It's like, hey,
okay.
Because they had a board meeting, that means we're probably going to get a trailer because they're going to release their quarterly earnings, and and that's like, whoa, that's a really good angle, and they've done that in the past. And where do you get that kind of info, or is that part of your life outside of Star Wars?
It's just developed over time. I mean, and it's not always correct. Like, for example, here we are about to get a trailer for The Rise of Skywalker, and 3 previous December releases, they had the trailer debut on Columbus Day, and they didn't do it this time. So, it's not always correct, but it's looking back at history, and I was slower on the Disney earnings calls in realizing, oh yeah, they actually do usually say something during those. It's probably worth paying attention. It took me a couple of years before I started factoring that into my machinations. But it's experience of having done it more than anything else. And
this podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.